Blessed Poya, and welcome to Path to Freedom. And on Path to Freedom, we always discuss about Buddhism, and we bring a lot of information with regards to how you should live your life whilst following the philosophy of Buddhism. And today with us on Path to Freedom, we have a very special guest, and we will have a series of programs every single Poya day, and we'll talk about different topics. So we have with us Dr. Vipula, who is a former Sri Lankan diplomat, Director General of Tourism Authority, currently a senior lecturer for Edith Cowan University in Perth and Australian College of Business and Technology. He also conducts meditation sessions for tourists after the publication of his book Pointers to Enlightenment 7 years ago. So today's topic on Path to Freedom would be about corporate culture and spirituality. And what's most important is that we have to understand that life is really busy and hectic these days, and many of us are attached to the corporate world. So how can we still work with the world and also follow the philosophy? That's the biggest question. So today we will have a lot of enlightenment on this topic. Welcome to our program Path to Freedom, Mr. Vipula.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
We are honored to have you with us on the series of programs. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be touching on corporate culture and spirituality. So first, let's talk about the significance of Buddhist philosophy to begin with.
The significance of Buddhist philosophy can be explained through several features. The first is the feature of self-discovery. In Buddhist philosophy, it is spelled out that you yourself have to see this reality, see the true nature of life and existence. So in other words, one has the discretion and freedom to go to any spiritual master, spiritual leaders. You study the teachings of all of them, and you also have the freedom to go through most of the literature and then take the advantage of doing comparative studies. You know, we have comparative religion, comparative philosophies, and then see the reality for yourself. And that is something which is very unique in Buddhist philosophy, where it says you yourself have to see this. No one else can give this to you like a gift. You can hear them, you can read, you can try to understand, but seeing is entirely yours, and that's what we call, self-realization. So that is one significant aspect of Buddhist philosophy. Then the second thing is that Buddhist philosophy also advocates that that the followers should not base their acceptances on beliefs. In fact, Lord Buddha himself has said not to believe anything. Even if you see teaching in literature, or even if these teachings have come from generation to generation, even if these teachings are spelled out by those who claim to have attained enlightenment, do not believe. And then in this particular sermon that I am referring to, gives out certain elements through which you can see whether there is a rationale. You simply ask yourself, can this be true? How do I assess this through my own experience? And that's the only way you can check something out. One person might say, okay, this could be this. Or is it my experience? If it is not, then you need to look into that. So that's the second aspect of Buddhist philosophy, which is very important. And the third one is that the Buddhist philosophy does not conflict or contest any other teachings, whether it is Hinduism or other religions or various other traditions. The Buddhist philosophy says this is for you to see, and we are not here to say what another religion says is wrong. So therefore, it's that non-violent nature of Buddhist philosophy which is also significant and that we need to bear in mind.
Well, now that you touched upon the Buddhist philosophy, can you also define corporate culture and spirituality?
Yes, I think it's a very appropriate topic to discuss because in day-to-day life we used to compartmentalize these terminologies. Okay, corporate culture is business and spirituality is a search for freedom. The corporate culture is essentially whatever that happens within an organization or rather a business organization or a non-profit organization. And it could be spelled out through what the organization wants to achieve, the vision, the mission statements, and the various strategies, and how the organization is planning to reach their short-term and long-term goals, and also the orientations of various organizations. Some are more custom-oriented, while the others are more production or product-oriented. And everything that is spelled out, what is their employment policy and what kind of rules and regulations they have to observe, and the targets they have to reach, and so on and so forth. And these are all coming within the corporate culture. And they have also added in the recent past, probably in the last 2 decades or so, values within an organization, what kind of values that we need to observe. So that's the definition of corporate culture. Now, spirituality takes us beyond that to a wider spectrum of areas. For instance, spirituality some years ago, probably a century ago, it was religious based. The spirituality as a definition was mainly concerned about a religion and what that religion is spelling out. But later on, spirituality started embracing whatever that is expressed about life and existence. So that's spirituality. Anything that is said about life and existence is spirituality. And that leads us to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of our lives and what are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? And why are certain things happening in a particular way and certain things that are unknowable? And that's essentially spirituality.
From the Buddhist point of view, are they complementary or conflicting?
Definitely these two must be complementary for the simple reason that you cannot possibly discuss about a business which is anyway part of life and existence. You are running a business because that is what you are doing for a living. Whether it is entrepreneurship or whether it is an organization or whether it is a multinational, it is still coming within the framework of life and existence. So therefore, it is very difficult for anyone to separate these two and say, well, this is business and this is the way you need to conduct a business. And there are norms and regulations that you need to follow. And spirituality is something else that, if someone is religious, you tend to say, that person is very spiritual. If you see someone going to temple quite often, you say, that person is spiritual. Or if you see someone going to the church, or you say that. It's not so. Spirituality encompasses all this. So therefore, it is necessary to some extent that these corporates need to view these essential elements of spirituality and to what extent it can help them to grow.
Well, how could one actually introduce components of spirituality into management and into operational functions as well?
Uh, Yes, now this requires a longer explanation, but I'll try to cut it short. Now, if you look at some of the big businesses, especially in the Asian region, and most of these philosophies have influenced the businesses. If you look at China, Japan, South Korea, and you look at the historic roots that have resulted these countries to be where they are in business, and these are now documented. You can read them. The philosophy of Confucius, and then Lao Tzu's Taoism, and Buddhist philosophy, and these have definitely influenced a lot of conglomerates, business organizations, multinationals to conduct their business within a particular framework. Now, I can give you one example. If you take Confucianism, it says two things. One is you need to get into the shoes of the other person. Whenever you make a decision, you try to ascertain how it will affect the other person. And all your decisions should be based on that principle. And you should be able to have that empathy. Then secondly, the Confucius theory also expresses about the self-discipline. Now that is the same thing that is taught in Buddhism. Now if you look at some of the teachings like Brahma Vivarana, or we call them Brahma Vihara, it's all about metta, karuna, mudita and upekkha. And that is precisely what has driven some of the big businesses in that part of the world. And they have become giants. So it is always correct to say that you need to embrace some of these teachings that are taught in spirituality overall, including Buddhist philosophy, in order to succeed, and be conscious of them. Of course, the Western world have followed this profit maximization, and they have seen the repercussions and the consequences as well. So you can clearly see how these elements have been taken into management and operational decisions, and ensure that, it very simply, this organization functions, or this organization exists for us. That's a notion that the employees have. We need to look after this organization because that serves us. So there's a vast difference between profit maximization to having that kind of a understanding.
Are there any case studies in which you could substantiate these aspects as well?
Yes, in fact, these case studies are being done by students and the universities at different levels. Now, if someone conducts a research about employee motivation in an organization, it is about finding out whether they are happy in the people who are working in organizations. If you find out the level of motivation, for instance, through a research, it's about finding out whether there is something that these people who are functioning there is getting out of this institution. On the other hand, there are studies that were done internationally. In fact, there's one study that was done last year, not long time ago, to find out the level of happiness of people who work in these multinational organizations, and the results were amazing. I can actually mention some of the companies that came in the first 10, like Adobe, and there were known companies also, IBM, Microsoft, and also HubSpot. They were not very much known, and Ring Center, and there were like Farmers Insurance. And these were the companies that came within the first 10 when they checked as to the level of happiness of the employees. Basically, what they asked was simply two questions. Would you like to be in this organization for the rest of your career? And they have said yes. Are you happy here? Yes, I am happy. It's a very simple research. Of course, there were several other questions they asked through their questionnaire. And then arrived at these companies which have come to the first 10. And that is something that these corporates need to look at in the long run. It's a little different to, like CSI activities that you see that various companies are doing. And sometimes they can be construed as like whitewashing, or window dressing. You may be in the wrong business completely, but then you try to do a few CSI activities and try to cover it up and say, okay, we do good things also. But no, it's bigger than that. So these are living examples, this recent research. And I believe this COVID has made a turnaround kind of, these corporates have to look at things differently, and spirituality will invariably be a factor that needs to be taken on board.
Well, you've explained a lot of ideal situations and things people could easily follow. But if what you're saying is right, why isn't it followed?
Well, that's exactly the meaning of spirituality. Now, for instance, last year before, I wrote an article about the unknowability. In fact, I titled it as Power of the Unknown. That was the title of this article, which most of the newspapers carried it. The element of unknowability sometimes, most of the time actually, is greater than what you could visualize. Of course, in business, we try to analyze the macro environment, the micro environment, see what's going to happen, and you develop your, in business parlance, you call them SWOT analyses and so on. But take COVID-19, it came out of the blues and no one expected it. And whether the companies were ready for that kind of a thing. I'm not referring to these natural disasters or these viruses, but there is always this element which is not conspicuous. You don't see it. And if you are aware of that, if you are conscious of that, the fact that things can go wrong, it's not in a negative connotation. It's not. On the other hand, I could raise the same question if everything happens according to your plan, because most of the organizations have their plans and strategies. Everything has to work, but it doesn't work. Sometimes a competitor can come and destroy your business overnight. You see, so this element of unknowability is such a strong factor that you need to be aware of, which is presented through spirituality. So that's a simple explanation to that. So while we are trying to achieve our day-to-day, short-term, long-term goals, we also need to be aware of the fact that you cannot possibly know everything that is happening in your environment.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Vipulavanagasekara, for those very enlightening words, and thank you very much for being a part of our episode of Path to Freedom, and we will certainly have more. And with that, it's time for us to wind up Path to Freedom, and today we discussed about corporate culture and spirituality. Have a blessed Poya, and see you again next Poya on Path to Freedom.